I was as surprised as everybody else when, for the first hour and a half, there was no camera crew on set at all. I know that put a little bit of a strain on the whole production.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, I want to talk about stress, and interestingly, in part 3 of the Deadly Take, an ABC News special on 2020, I'll put a link to that in the description, they talk about the day that is the 21st of October, starting off badly, starting off with stress, starting off with members of the crew not pitching up for work, basically being fired. And then, that is the way that day started, with dealing with this absence of crew members and then having to fill up those crew members' places with people who were now unfamiliar with one another, perhaps to some extent unfamiliar with the setting and with what was going on. And so this is how that fateful day starts, with stress, with added stress. And so the question we really want to ask here is, what was the scale of that stress? We want to know, was it normal stress or was it beyond the norm? Was it something that could lead to being distracted and not paying enough attention, not focusing enough, and also perhaps leading to negligence, which is the central legal question in this particular case? Was there so much stress that it caused people to be negligent? Before we continue with today's episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. You can click on the light blue icon on the bottom right of your screen, and let's get started. So obviously this question of stress is something that applies to everybody. It applies to the cinematographer, Helena. It applies to other crew members. It applies to the director. But it also applies to Alec Baldwin, of course, the person who was given the Colt 45 and who ultimately, was holding the gun when it went off, kind of thing. And so one wants to know what impact stress had on everyone, including Alec Baldwin. And so that's probably quite a good place to start. What was this man's state of mind given where he is in life? And I'm talking now from a very macro perspective, a very wide global perspective, thinking about Alec Baldwin just as a man. How old is he? Where is he in his life? He's got a young wife, a lot younger than him, and a newborn baby recently. And this newborn baby joined the Baldwin household in March this year. And you don't need to be a genius or a psychologist to figure out what was going on. You can just go on to Hilaria's Instagram to get a sense of what the family were up to and all the things that were going on, all the events that they attended, right? And that would give a sense of stress. Interestingly, I've just recently watched a movie last night called Something's Gotta Give with Jack Nicholson. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. In that movie, Jack Nicholson plays a 63-year-old who is trying to live the way he's always lived, but is having additional stress and he's trying to cope with it. And so it's kind of a funny analogy to what I'm trying to get to here. And of course, in this scenario, it is quite serious, the implications. What I want to focus your attention to is a video clip posted on Hilaria's Instagram where Alec Baldwin gets coffee for her in the rain and then gamely seems to be kind of in a good mood about the whole thing. And what I kind of want to emphasize here is he's a 60-something guy who's trying to play the gentleman to his young wife, and he's going out into the rain. Apparently his umbrella was also broken, and I think you don't need to say much in order to understand what one is getting at. It is, what strain, what fatigue, what stress could be the case if you're a 63-year-old parent to a newborn and also you've got a kind of a young wife who's got a certain energy level. Well, does it match yours? Once again, if you're not sure about where that dynamic takes you, go and watch Something's Gotta Give with Jack Nicholson. Now, you can take it in isolation and just say, how tiring would it be for a 63-year-old father to have a newborn child? So just a newborn child on its own, how tiring would that be, right? I'm a lot younger than Alec Baldwin, 14 years younger. I recently started looking after a puppy, and the dog is now 1.5 years old. I can tell you that dog was pretty exhausting early on. It changes your life. It limits you in certain ways, and although it brings joy in others, just something like a puppy can be a huge disruption to a household, and my dog certainly was, and to some extent still is. And that's just the puppy. Now, if you take into consideration you have a young partner as well as the puppy, plus there are 5, I think there are now 6 children in his household. It's a lot of puppies to take care of, right? And then there's Hilaria herself. Hilaria, I'm not quite sure how to say it. Hilaria, very attractive woman, very sexy, and there's also a clip of her kind of doing a handstand. Very fit, very physically active, high energy levels. One gets that sense, and so I'll put a link to that clip as well, where she's doing the handstand. And I don't know what her personality is, because personality is also a factor in stress between couples. Some people have calm personalities. Some people have they are not only calm in their personality, but passive in terms of the way they carry themselves. They might be homebodies or something. Whereas other people may be very assertive, outgoing, extroverted. So, as I said, I don't know what her personality is, but if it's anything like her husband's, I think it's feisty. And the article seems to confirm this feistiness, where there was a recent encounter with the New York Post reporter, remember, in front of Woody Allen's home, where she not only confronted the reporter, telling him, I asked you to leave, I asked you to go away. She confronted, gripped, and saw off her husband, who seemed to be about to fly off the handle. So you have this feisty woman that you're living with. And I'm not saying that necessarily is going to make you stressed, but I'm just saying that she's not a passive or a sort of a calm, in the sense of like a boring person. And that can lead to you being more active than maybe you would otherwise be as a 63-year-old. Does that make sense? So I guess what I'm getting at is the wear and tear, perhaps in trying to appear hip and young and happening to a attractive, sexy 30-something with a newborn and 5 other kids, right? What does that take out of you when you 60-something? And one wonders whether his appearance and performance in Rust, given the context, given his wife, given his children, was part of an effort to appear masculine, virile, and strong. So he's not just appearing in a movie, he's appearing to them, to his family members, to his young wife and his 6 kids. And so the question arises, was there some overcompensating, not only in terms of cutting corners, but in trying to emphasize himself, right? And so we've heard before that the crucial scene didn't actually require firing of the weapon. But think of how the firing of a gun is kind of like the point of the whole thing in a cowboy movie or in any movie. It's about emphasizing how badass a particular character is. It's the climax of a particular scene. Think about guns and firing, for example, in the movie The Matrix. In Afrikaans, there's this saying that describes the average action movie, skop, skit and donder. It translates to kick, shoot and beat up. And so in a fictional setting, the more skop, skit and donder there is, in other words, the more shooting and aggression, the more action in your movie, and thus the bigger your hero becomes. The more of a action hero he becomes. The more action hero. The more shooting, same thing. But in a scenario where there's also stress, the question becomes, how does that translate to perhaps pulling the trigger, including when one is perhaps not supposed to or not required to? Bear in mind, Baldwin in this particular situation was just in a rehearsal, right? And I don't think anyone asked him to pull the trigger, right? He wasn't asked to do it, it wasn't required. So the thing that arises is, did things at home possibly influence Baldwin's overall judgment? Could be a simple thing like not getting enough sleep, not necessarily that day, but kind of for a lot of that year, right? Since the arrival of the newborn in March. Or do you think things on the home front are completely irrelevant? The other thing that I think is worth noting is that the cinematographer was also stressed. And once again, the question is, was she stressed more than normal, or was it just a normal amount of stress? And let's go to the deadly take for a little clip from there, audio clip from there.
She was under pressure to not look stressed, to keep everything rolling.
So you might think we're being unfair, how on earth can you talk about stress? But it is something that you deal with in true crime. In fact, there's intertextuality with the John Benet Ramsey case. And this year, of course, is the 25-year anniversary. In the John Benet Ramsey case, a question that was raised was about Patsy Ramsey's stress levels in particular. She was turning 40 that year. That December of 1996, they were throwing and attending a number of back-to-back parties. Also, her husband had recently achieved a milestone in his business. Axis Graphics, a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, had just passed 1 billion in turnover, and there were parties surrounding that. And so the question was, amidst all of this busyness and turmoil and stress, did somebody overlook something? Also, was John Benet stressed? Was she healthy? Was she sleeping enough? Was a little girl and perhaps someone else neglected opening the door to an accident happening? So it's the same sort of idea. Does that make sense? And I will be dealing with the John Benet Ramsey case in a video after this one. We've heard from more than two crew members now. Well, from two crew members, we're about to hear from a third, that they were stressed. We heard from Thomas Gandy, and we've heard from two other people, I'll play the second in a moment, that the cinematographer herself was stressed. And again, this is a clip from the Deadly Take, Part 3, an ABC News documentary. Listen to this.
She wasn't her usual, calm, focused, cheerful self.
And a cinematographer is a creative person. They need the right space around them to work. And so in a scenario where 6 people walk off the set and there's suddenly only one camera available, that is going to be putting pressure on you, not only pressure to work, but to focus on the visuals, the scene that you've got in your mind to render. That it's certainly going to put a lot of pressure on this person who's so central, who is more central to a movie than the person filming it, the cinematographer. And so clearly she felt stress. So if she felt stress and other crew members felt stress, didn't Alec Baldwin as well? And another question is, did he feel other stress besides the stress of the film? And I think this raises the other interesting question, which is, all of this was filmed inside a pandemic. And that is something that you notice in some of these still images. You see the crew members wearing masks, right? And so that would certainly have given added stress anyway to the film, that aspect, wearing this mask, being aware of that in addition to everything else. And interestingly, concern about safety in terms of the COVID measures, that is actually mentioned in the email from the one person who was part of the 6 that walked off. And so you can see there are quite a few layers of stress that are working in on the events that led to the incident at midday on the 21st of October on the set of Rust. A final thing I just want to bring up, and this is going back to Alec Baldwin and the setting, the vibe on the home front, how stressful were things on the home front, is the situation with Hilaria's claims about Spanish heritage. She described it as being a nightmare in December 2020. And so you may have had this prolonged period of almost attrition, of tension, of strain the previous year, in addition to the pandemic. And so the question is, how many of these macro long-term stresses kind of played and resonated and accentuated, aggravated, worsened the immediate stresses of that particular day, and perhaps led to someone making a mistake? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.